When friendship turns fatal and laughter becomes a death sentence, the line between harmless fun and deadly consequences disappears in an instant. These are the stories of pranks gone catastrophically wrong, where split-second decisions led to unimaginable tragedy. It was August 18, 2017, and a desert wash outside Flagstaff, Arizona sat under the late afternoon sun. The dry riverbed, shaped by years of seasonal flooding, was quiet, with only sparse vegetation along its edges. Storm activity was building in the surrounding region, but the immediate area remained dry. The hardened soil cracked after months without rain. 27-year-old Tabor Flynn adjusted his camera equipment as his friends moved around him, joking and checking live stream settings. A freelance content creator known for endurance challenges, Tabor had built a modest online following by willingly placing himself in uncomfortable but controlled situations. What he did not know was that the group's latest idea had quietly shifted from a planned stunt into something else entirely. The original pitch was a fake, buried alive prank meant to frighten Tabor briefly before an immediate reveal. He was told the box would not be fully sealed and that the burial would remain shallow and short. Without informing him, the group later changed the plan, deciding to enclose the box completely and extend the time underground to capture a stronger reaction on camera. They built a plywood coffin reinforced with scrap lumber and added LED lights powered by a small battery pack. Despite appearing solid, the structure showed clear flaws, including thin panels, uneven seams, and poorly supported joints. Ventilation relied on a single 2-inch PVC pipe connected to a small battery-powered fan that was never tested under load. The wash was selected for privacy and visual effect. No one addressed its role as a runoff channel during monsoon season. Although the ground was dry, storm activity was developing elsewhere, a risk dismissed in favor of producing more convincing footage. As the sun dipped toward the western mountains, Tabor climbed into the box, believing the prank would end within minutes. The lid was sealed, and his friends shoveled between 18 and 24 inches of dirt on top, far more than he expected. At first, the ventilation system hummed steadily, and his voice came through the radio inside as he laughed nervously, assuming the reveal was imminent. 20 minutes in, rain began falling, but not from clouds overhead. Intense rainfall upstream sent muddy runoff racing toward the wash. Within minutes, dry soil above the coffin absorbed moisture, transforming into dense mud. Liquefaction dramatically increased hydrostatic pressure against the box. The added weight of waterlogged earth multiplied the load far beyond what the thin plywood could withstand. The ventilation pipe became the first failure point. Mud clogged the opening, choking airflow despite the fan before it stalled completely. Above, saturated soil compacted, pressing downward with hundreds of pounds of force. The lid bowed inward, seams separating as shifting mud stressed the weakened joints. Panic set in as the group struggled to dig through heavy clay-like mud clinging to their shovels. The coffin shifted beneath the pressure, and a critical seam cracked open, allowing slurry to seep inside. Trapped with no fresh air and increasing compression-limiting chest expansion, oxygen levels dropped rapidly. By the time the group exposed enough of the lid to pry it open, Tabor was unresponsive. Emergency responders were called as the situation deteriorated, but efforts to revive him at the scene were unsuccessful. The medical examiner ruled the death the result of compressive and positional asphyxia caused by restricted breathing after ventilation failed and the burial structure collapsed under saturated soil. Investigators cited unsafe planning, reliance on a single ventilation point, and the decision to stage the filming inside an active runoff channel during monsoon season. While evidence showed the burial conditions differed from what had been agreed upon beforehand, authorities determined there was insufficient proof of intent to cause serious harm. The death was classified as accidental. Several participants received citations for reckless endangerment and violations related to unsafe filming practices. No criminal charges were filed, though civil liability remained possible. The remote location that had been chosen for privacy contributed to delayed emergency access. What began as a prank intended for online footage ended as a fatal miscalculation shaped by poor judgment and environmental risk. But Tabor wasn't the only one whose trust in friends led to tragedy. Miles away in a Denver apartment, a meticulous office worker was about to discover that even the most innocent-seeming pranks could have devastating consequences. It was February 12, 2016, and the narrow hallway of a 3-bedroom apartment in Denver, Colorado lay dimly lit in the evening hours. A single overhead bulb had burned out weeks earlier, leaving only the ambient glow from nearby rooms to illuminate the cramped passage. The carpeted floor showed the wear patterns of daily foot traffic, and the walls bore the typical scuff marks of furniture being moved through the tight space. 31-year-old Vancy Drubb had spent another long day processing paperwork at a downtown office building, her meticulous nature making her invaluable for organizing and maintaining detailed records. Known among her roommates for her obsessive cleanliness and inability to tolerate even minor clutter, Vancy had developed a reputation for immediately addressing any mess she encountered. Her physical fitness routine and active lifestyle kept her in excellent shape, though her perfectionist tendencies sometimes created tension in the shared living space. Earlier that evening, her roommates, frustrated with Vancy's constant complaints about housekeeping, had planned what they considered a harmless hidden camera prank inspired by viral tripline videos. They strung clear high-tensile fishing line across the hallway at ankle height, roughly 8 inches above the floor, and positioned several pillows just beyond the nearly invisible barrier to cushion what they expected would be a minor stumble. To ensure the prank looked authentic, they carefully angled the cameras to capture her face, unaware of how quickly events could spiral out of control. The lighting worked in their favor. With the overhead bulb out and only indirect illumination filtering from adjacent rooms, the transparent line became virtually impossible to detect. Phones were set near door frames, ready to capture what they anticipated would be an embarrassing but harmless fall. Vancy returned home, carrying a 45-pound glass-top side table she had purchased from a coworker. The piece, featuring a heavy metal frame supporting a large, thick annealed decorative glass surface, completely blocked her view of the floor as she navigated the familiar hallway. The weight distribution made the item awkward to carry, requiring her to hold it at chest level to maintain balance. Her fingers gripped the metal edge tightly as she took careful steps, unaware of the hazard ahead. The fishing line caught both of her ankles simultaneously, creating sudden forward momentum that she could not control. The table struck the floor edge first with tremendous force, and the glass shattered violently against the metal frame. Instead of the soft landing her roommates had planned, Vancy fell directly onto the broken panel. As the table struck the floor, the annealed glass shattered, leaving a large, jagged section partially upright. Vancy fell forward onto the broken panel, and a sharp edge penetrated near her collarbone, severing major blood vessels in her neck and upper chest. Heavy arterial bleeding began immediately, creating a rapidly expanding pool on the hallway carpet. Her roommates, initially assuming she was exaggerating as part of the staged reaction, hesitated for several crucial seconds before realizing the severity of the situation. They attempted to apply pressure using towels and clothing, but the location and depth of the wound made effective compression nearly impossible. The bleeding continued at an alarming rate, and Vancy's responses became increasingly weak and incoherent. Emergency responders arrived to find no detectable pulse despite their rapid response time. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from catastrophic exsanguination due to penetrating glass trauma. Investigators documented the deliberate placement of the trip hazard and noted that the fishing line remained intact and properly positioned, confirming the intentional nature of the setup. The roommates faced local charges for negligent endangerment, though the death was ultimately classified as accidental traumatic injury directly caused by the prank. The case showed how a simple prank could turn fatal under the wrong conditions. Investigators noted that the roommates failed to account for how carrying a heavy object could dramatically increase the risk posed by the trip line. But Vancy wasn't the only victim of friends who underestimated the consequences of their actions. Hundreds of miles south, a software technician was about to learn that some people refuse to believe in medical conditions they cannot see. It was May 18, 2017, and the abandoned wooden storage barn behind a family farmhouse outside Cedar Ridge, Oregon, sat quietly in the afternoon heat. The structure, unused for years, housed only dust-covered feed sacks and rusted equipment scattered across uneven wooden flooring. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the weathered siding, illuminating particles floating in the still air. High in the rafters, a wild honeybee colony had established itself weeks earlier, their presence visible but largely ignored by the property owners. 16-year-old Leora Cade had arrived that morning for a weekend family gathering, her easygoing personality making her popular among the extended relatives who had assembled for the occasion. Known for her part-time work caring for children and volunteering at a local animal shelter, she had developed a reputation for being willing to participate in harmless jokes and challenges. What her cousins didn't know was that Leora carried a severe bee sting allergy. a condition known only to her immediate family and carefully managed through avoidance and emergency medication. Several cousins had devised what they considered a harmless scare prank for the afternoon's entertainment. They rigged a plastic pail filled with approximately 2 to 3 pounds of powdered livestock feed, additive above the barn's entry door, designed to tip when someone opened it. The powder, sweet-smelling and lightly dusty, was intended to create a visual jump scare for their phones. None of them checked the barn's interior or considered the possibility of the active hive in the rafters above. Leora was convinced to retrieve an item from inside the barn as part of a staged challenge, while her cousins positioned themselves at safe distances to record her reaction. When she opened the barn door, the pail tipped immediately, dumping the powder directly onto her head and shoulders. The falling container struck her lightly while producing a sudden noise that reverberated through the enclosed space. The forced entry, sudden movement, and impact directly beneath the rafters disturbed the hidden honeybee colony, triggering a defensive swarm. She stepped further inside, brushing powder from her hair and clothing. Her sudden movements in proximity to the hive were perceived as a threat by the emerging bees. The first stings occurred within seconds, releasing alarm pheromones that rapidly drew additional defenders from the colony. Multiple bees targeted her exposed neck, face, and arms as she attempted to retreat toward the doorway. Stumbling over the uneven flooring and stacked boards, she fell while more bees continued to sting. The confined space made escape difficult, and the accumulation of stings quickly overwhelmed her system. Swelling became noticeable around her lips and throat, and her breathing grew labored as the severe allergic reaction progressed. Her epinephrine auto-injector remained inside the farmhouse, inaccessible as the swarm prevented anyone from reaching her. She collapsed near the barn entrance as her cardiovascular system began to fail. Her cousins approached but were immediately forced back by the aggressive swarm. 2 of them received minor stings before retreating to a safer distance, unable to reach her without protective gear. Emergency services were called while the bees continued to guard the barn. Firefighters arrived wearing protective suits and used smoke to disperse the swarm, before extracting Leora several minutes after her collapse. CPR was administered immediately, and she was transported to the nearest hospital but was pronounced deceased shortly after arrival. The medical examiner confirmed that death resulted from severe anaphylactic shock following multiple bee stings. Investigators noted that the prank had unintentionally created conditions that increased the risk of a fatal reaction due to both the disturbed hive and Leora's unknown allergy. The cousins stated they were unaware of her condition, and authorities documented the prank as a case of reckless endangerment, though no criminal charges were filed due to the absence of intent and the circumstances surrounding the swarm. We've got more disturbing prank tragedies coming up, so hit that subscribe button if you want to see how jokes meant to be harmless can turn deadly in seconds. It was May 28, 2018, and the rolling fields near Fredericksburg, Virginia, stretched under a clear spring sky, dotted with the white canvas tents and period equipment of a Civil War reenactment event. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the carefully maintained battlefield replica, where dozens of history enthusiasts had gathered to recreate authentic military demonstrations. The smell of black powder hung faintly in the air from earlier firing exercises, and the sound of period music drifted from the encampment area. 42-year-old Morris Swick walked among the displays with obvious excitement, her enthusiasm for historical education evident in how she examined each artifact and listened intently to veteran reenactors' explanations. As a volunteer at a local history museum, she had developed a deep appreciation for hands-on learning experiences, but had never participated in a live reenactment before. Her colleagues had recommended the event as an excellent way to gain practical knowledge about Civil War military life, and several experienced participants had invited her to observe their demonstrations. The veteran reenactors had planned what they considered a harmless initiation prank for the newcomer. They intended to stage a fake accidental musket discharge near Mora, expecting to capture her startled reaction on camera while demonstrating the realistic nature of their hobby. The plan seemed straightforward enough, using a black powder replica musket loaded with a blank charge to create the dramatic sound and smoke effect without any actual projectile. However, the weapon had been placed on the ground earlier during setup, and due to the rushed preparation by an inexperienced participant, a small pebble had lodged unnoticed in the barrel opening. The rocky field conditions and casual handling of equipment during the day's activities made such contamination a predictable risk, though none of the pranksters considered this possibility while preparing the staged incident. The musket, was loaded with a standard blank charge without inspecting the barrel interior. Mora was positioned approximately 10 feet away from the firing point, a distance the pranksters believed would provide dramatic effect while maintaining complete safety. The safety briefing she had received earlier made no mention of the planned staged incident, leaving her unaware of what was about to occur. When the musket fired, the expanding gases from the blank charge expelled the lodged pebble from the barrel at close range. The small stone struck Mora in the upper chest at close range, penetrating her torso and causing immediate internal injury. She collapsed immediately upon impact, and the observers initially assumed her dramatic fall was an exaggerated reaction to the loud discharge, exactly the type of response they had hoped to capture. The realization that something had gone seriously wrong came when Mora remained motionless on the ground. Her breathing became shallow and irregular as internal bleeding progressed rapidly from the penetrating trauma. The pebble had caused significant damage to vital structures in her chest cavity, creating injuries that were not immediately visible from the outside. Emergency responders were called when it became clear that Mora was not responding normally. She was transported to the nearest hospital, where medical staff confirmed the extent of the internal injuries caused by the high-velocity debris. Despite surgical intervention, the trauma proved fatal. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from penetrating chest trauma caused by debris propelled from a blank cartridge discharge. Investigators documented the failure to inspect the musket barrel before loading and the unsafe positioning of an uninformed participant during the staged prank. The individual who fired the weapon faced charges related to reckless endangerment and unsafe firearm handling during the activity. The incident highlighted the dangerous misconception that blank ammunition is inherently safe. Even without traditional projectiles, blank charges generate sufficient force to propel foreign objects at lethal velocities. The case demonstrated how seemingly harmless pranks involving firearms could have fatal consequences when basic safety protocols were ignored. But Mora wasn't the only person to discover that pranks involving everyday objects could turn deadly. In rural Oklahoma, a postal worker was about to encounter a surprise that would prove far more dangerous than anyone anticipated. It was June 9, 2016, and the rural roads outside Tulsa, Oklahoma stretched through rolling farmland under the intense heat of an early summer morning. The temperature had already climbed past 80 degrees, with humidity that made the air feel thick and oppressive. Scattered mailboxes lined the gravel and asphalt routes, marking the entrances to properties separated by hundreds of yards of pasture and woodland. The isolation that made this area attractive to residents seeking privacy also meant that help could be far away when emergencies arose, and passing motorists were few and far between. 38-year-old Roderick Jant had been delivering mail along these same routes for over a decade, developing a reputation among rural residents for his reliability and consistent service. His methodical approach to the job meant that customers could set their clocks by his arrival times, and his familiarity with the area allowed him to navigate efficiently between widely spaced addresses. The physical demands of the work kept him in good shape, though the summer heat made the long days increasingly challenging, and the quiet of the morning offered little distraction from the isolated rhythm of his route. Earlier that week, a local resident had captured a western diamondback rattlesnake that had been spotted near their property. Rather than relocating the animal safely, they decided to use it as the centerpiece of an elaborate prank targeting a friend who lived further down the route. The plan involved placing the snake inside the friend's mailbox, expecting to capture their terrified reaction when they discovered the unwelcome surprise. The prankster placed the snake loose inside the standard metal mailbox without any containment or warning markers. The confined space and rising temperature inside the metal enclosure increased the animal's stress and defensive behavior significantly. Western diamondbacks are naturally aggressive when cornered, and the hot, cramped environment made the snake particularly volatile and ready to strike at any perceived threat, its rattling tail a constant warning sign that went unnoticed by anyone outside. What the prankster failed to consider was the timing of regular mail delivery. Their intended target typically checked their mail in the evening, but Roderick's route brought him to that address during the late morning hours when the metal mailbox had already begun heating up under the direct sunlight, turning the enclosure into a sweltering trap. Roderick approached the mailbox from his delivery vehicle, following his standard routine of opening the door while remaining partially seated. The moment he lifted the metal lid, the agitated rattlesnake struck immediately, sinking its fangs into his forearm near the wrist. The bite delivered a substantial dose of hemotoxic venom directly into his bloodstream. The initial pain was intense and immediate, followed rapidly by swelling that spread up his arm. Tissue necrosis and internal bleeding began to set in, while the venom's disruption of coagulation gradually caused systemic hemorrhaging. Roderick lost coordination as the toxins affected his circulation, and his delivery vehicle rolled slowly forward into the roadside ditch when his foot slipped from the brake pedal. He managed to exit the vehicle but began deteriorating over the next hour. As hemorrhagic shock and organ stress progressed, the pain and swelling intensifying with every passing minute. The remote location meant that no immediate help was available, and his radio calls for assistance went unanswered due to poor signal coverage in the area. By the time emergency responders arrived approximately 18 minutes after the initial bite, Roderick was in severe shock. He was transported to the hospital where antivenom was administered, but the delay and intensity of the hemotoxic effects had already triggered coagulopathy, multi-organ failure, and extensive tissue damage. Despite aggressive treatment, the complications proved fatal hours after the bite. Investigators identified the prankster through interviews with neighbors who had witnessed the snake capture. The individual faced charges for wildlife violations and reckless endangerment, though local prosecutors noted the difficulty of proving intent to harm the mail carrier specifically. Authorities emphasized the predictable danger of placing a venomous animal in a location where unsuspecting people would encounter it. The case demonstrated how pranks involving dangerous wildlife could have fatal consequences for unintended victims. What began as a misguided attempt to frighten a friend ended with the death of an innocent man simply doing his job, and a quiet rural route became the scene of a preventable tragedy. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.